I want to talk about the dark side of the consulting industry. And this is not the dark side that I've seen in many news articles over the past several months. We've seen many articles attacking the consulting industry, especially Mckinsey, for doing a number of things, including ruining capitalism, CEO compensation, and many other problems in the business world. However, I think this misses the point. There are some real concerns with the industry, but these articles show a lack of understanding of what consultants actually do. Many of these articles attack Pete Buttigieg, who's running for the US president in 2020, and they give him, as an entry-level analyst, credit for basically the downfall of capitalism, which I think misses the point. Here's a quote where Pete actually talks about his experience at the firm. Mostly I was with fellow consultants in a room working on a spreadsheet, and that tracks to my own experience and what I know most people at these firms are doing. They're working for big organizations and tinkering around the edges to help companies save money or make a little more money. I want to take you through 4 blind spots, which I think are a little more subtle and actually get to some deeper, more systemic issues with the consulting industry. I also am not sure that these problems can be solved, but I think they're worth reflecting upon because they have a lot of influence on the broader business world and how people think about their careers and the work they're doing throughout the business world. Blind spot number 1 is that these firms mistake credentials for wisdom or worthiness to work at these firms. I experienced this firsthand. I worked at a non-target school when I worked at Mckinsey. There were about 6 other people that went to my school out of 10,000 at the time, and most of them were not in frontline consulting positions. I think there were 1 or 2. On the other hand, I searched internally and found hundreds, I think over 1,000 people with a Harvard affiliation. This isn't a problem, right? These are great schools, and I worked with a ton of tremendous people. Except this kind of thinking cascades throughout the business world. I've worked in so many environments where ex-consultants work, where these kind of people work, and they won't even consider people unless they went to the right schools. I did some research in January of 2020 on LinkedIn and found that this still holds pretty true. About 5% of people at Mckinsey went to at least one of Harvard's schools. And then broadening the search, I found that 15% of the employees had some affiliation with these 5 schools: Harvard, Penn, London School of Economics, Stanford, or INSEAD. Blind spot number 2 is an over-reliance on a simple organizational model. There's a couple problems with this. One is that it ignores unintended side effects. The answer in consulting is always to come up with another initiative, and these initiatives are led in a top-down fashion, and they're really tracked on a short-term basis. Given the length of a consulting engagement, it's hard to figure out what the impact of something really is 5 or 10 years down the road. Similarly, many people in high-ranking positions and companies change jobs every couple of years. And because of this, there's not really any accountability for what you're doing. So you have consulting firms over and over again recommending top-down initiatives to executives, and those executives are going to just keep doing them because they're incentivized to look good to their boss, their CEO, their board, and they want to show that they're doing something, and they're going to choose the simple model to do it. This is the default model. You typically have one person leading an initiative, or at least a single owner, and rolling it out to its people. Many of the people are disillusioned by having many past bosses implement similar initiatives. And you typically can come up with ways of showing that you did have impact. However, people have started to think that organizations should much more be thought of as what they call complex adaptive systems. I'm not going to go fully into this right now, but needless to say that Designing change for a complex adaptive system is much different than just implementing something in a top-down fashion. It's going to take into account what are the second and third order effects, and instead shift the thinking to how do you cultivate a system which can drive change and learn as it evolves. Gary Grobman wrote a fascinating paper about complexity theory if it were to be applied to modern organizations in 2005, titled A New Way to Look at Organizational Change. His paper suggested that if you manage an organization taking this into account, you would much more rely on self-organization of teams, informal communication networks, avoid the over-reliance on procedures, don't get rid of them completely, and you'd have redundant and competitive teams competing for the best ideas, often at the lowest levels. Blind spot number 3 has to do with the consultant's favorite word, impact. And there's 2 issues here. One is that impact is a great way to analyze the effects you're having on your clients. However, the way it's oriented, the consultant is incentivized to only think about it in a positive manner. In addition, they also think about impact as scale. And the bigger the impact, the bigger it is. And people have gotten so caught up in this idea that it's driven how people think about their jobs and their careers. People no longer just want to help people, they want to help people at scale. And even if you're not interacting with them, it's more important that you're impacting millions of people through whatever network you're operating in than the actual work you're doing on the ground. Blind spot 4 is also about how people think about their career. And because consulting is one of these track professions, people are often starting to think about it when they're even a freshman in college. They're already practicing case interviews to break into the industry. Or they go back to business school after a couple of years of working and then devote their efforts into breaking into a consulting firm. Once you're in a consulting firm, you're on this track that opens you up to a lot of different opportunities. You can work in corporate strategy, you can work at other consulting firms. However, there's almost this built-in expectation that you're always going to be progressing. You're always going to do something more challenging, making more money every step along the way. Along that process, people start to see themselves not as humans operating as a consultant, but workers themselves. Under this mindset, taking time away from work is solely in service of work. Joseph Pieper, a philosopher in the 1940s, wrote about this. He said, "A simple break from work, the kind that lasts an hour or the kind that lasts a week or longer, is part and parcel of the daily working life. The break is there for the sake of work. It is supposed to provide new strength for new work." So what's the problem with this, right? Work is important. It's a central aspect of our life. I think Andrew Taggart puts this perfectly and powerfully when he says what's so disturbing about total work, and total work is his conception of this problem, is not that it causes needless human suffering, but also that it eradicates the forms of playful contemplation concerned with our asking, pondering, and answering the most basic questions of human existence. What concerns me about this is that so many people from consulting go into all aspects of the business world and propagate this idea, not purposely, but indirectly through their actions, signaling that the work is always the most important thing. This leads to a crowding out of some of the joy of life, some of the meaning, and some of the things I've found in my own journey leaving full-time employment and into self-employment. I don't have any good answer for these 4 blind spots, but I think they're worth contemplating as the wider business community is contemplating what is the purpose of business, what is the purpose of capitalism, and how can we do great work in these environments and with our current institutions.